Hi, everyone. This is Steve Fawcette. I'm the director and writer and executive producer of the sci-fi film Unbelievable.
Hello, my name is Angelique Fawcette. I'm the producer, executive producer, and actress in Unbelievable.
Hi, my name is Gerald Fried. I was one of the composers for Star Trek, which is one of the glories of my composing life. You're listening to TREK Untold.
Hello and welcome to TREK Untold, the podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. The Star Trek franchise has spawned plenty of copycats since its inception, along with the numerous shows inspired by the series that continue today. It also brought with it parodies. We can't forget that when the original series began, it was as much a highly philosophical piece of art as it was a campy and colorful sign of its times, limited by the special effects available at the time. Those shortcomings have often been the butt of jokes, and who doesn't pretend to talk like William Shatner like this? On this week's episode of TREK Untold, we're speaking with not one, not two, but three guests for the first time ever, and all of them are involved in a new sci-fi parody film called Unbelievable. Up first is Angelique and Steven Fawcette from Archangel Films LA, who are the creators of Unbelievable. This Star Trek-inspired film brought together 40 Star Trek actors, including Nichelle Nichols, Walter Koenig, Michael Dorn, Marina Sirtis, Robert Picardo, Garrett Wang, Chase Masterson, Tim Russ, Armin Shimmerman, Linda Park, Jeffrey Combs, and many, many more, as well as a few other Hollywood notables, including Michael Madsen, Robert Davi, and Snoop Dogg. Yeah, I said Snoop Dogg, and he's actually the main villain in the film. We're going to talk to this creative team about making this movie and what it was like to be surrounded by so many luminaries from the Trekverse. And following our chat with the Fawcettes, we have the privilege to be speaking with Gerald Fried, who was one of the original composers for Star Trek that's still alive today. Gerald's music has been heard in Shore Leave, Cat's Paw, Friday's Child, The Paradise Syndrome, and he is the man responsible for that famous Amok Time music that has been heard in so many other shows and films and, heck, even internet memes nowadays. The 5 pieces he composed for Trek were reused multiple times throughout the series, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how he made those pieces. Beyond Star Trek, Gerald has made music for some of Stanley Kubrick's early films, including Paths of Glory and The Killing, and also composed music for Gilligan's Island, Mission Impossible, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Shotgun Slade, Lost in Space, Roots, Dynasty, and the fan-made series Star Trek New Voyages Phase 2. If you take a look at Gerald's resume, it's incredibly long, with I think about 200 different things he's composed for, ranging from incredibly well-known pieces to some lesser-known things like some of Roger Corman's work. Most recently, the Fawcettes got Jerry out of retirement to score their film Unbelievable, and it's thanks to them that we had the opportunity to speak with a man whose resume in scoring and composing truly is unbelievable. Before we jump into our interview, I want to remind everyone to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TREK Untold, and that's all one word, no spaces. You can also support this show by visiting patreon.com/TrekUntold. If you want to check out some of our merch and put Trek Untold on a shirt, hoodie, mug, sticker, or something else, head on over to teespring.com/stores/TrekUntold to proudly display how much you like this podcast. And if you do happen to get some Trek Untold merch, go ahead and tag us on social media and let us know you got it. We'd love to see it. But most of all, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast and to leave a rating and a review. There is a lot of Star Trek podcasts out there, as I'm sure you already know, and leaving ratings and reviews helps people find us when they're searching for these types of shows. If you're already following us or offering your support in whatever way you can, be it a follow, review, monetarily, or even just listening today, thank you for the help. There's a family of Star Trek podcasts out there, and we appreciate you joining us here each and every week on the show. I'd also like to make a quick shout out to our friends at Triple Fiction Productions, who make some great 3D printed Star Trek inspired products for toys and people. But you'll hear more about them a little bit later on in the show. Now, without further ado, let's beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file.
Affirmative. Initiating program.
And welcome back to Trek Untold. And we're now going to talk about a movie that takes place in a time not unlike ours today, except there's one key difference, and that's Martians have now conquered Earth and replaced human beings with plants. And it's up to 4 astronauts, one of which just happens to be a puppet, to defeat the Martians, save Earth, and, well, do all sorts of other crazy things. Today we're speaking with the people behind the film Unbelievable, which was just released on August 1st. It's a sci-fi parody that honors the Star Trek franchise and really is a love letter to the series and just sci-fi as a whole. So we are joined today by Angelique and Steven Fawcette. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing pretty good. How about you?
Hi, Matthew. How are you?
Hey, all right, I'm doing pretty great here. So yeah, I just actually watched the movie last night, in fact, for the first time. It's a lot of fun. There's so many Star Trek in-jokes. But before we get to Unbelievable, I wanted to ask you guys the question that we ask all of our listeners on this show, and that's, what is your earliest memory of Star Trek? And Angelique, let's start with you.
My earliest memory of Star Trek, I was born in 1970, so when I was watching Star Trek, I thought that was the actual series. I didn't know that it was reruns. So I was living in Riverside, California at the time. I was a little girl, and we were watching, the old style TVs that's got legs, they're square, and they have wood, and they've got a turn channel,
Oh, yeah.
It's not like you don't use a remote control. There is an antenna and the whole thing. And my brother was watching it, and I just thought it was really interesting, but I was just captivated by the characters. I think the very first episode I watched, I don't think it was Arena. Arena is my favorite episode ever. But I think it was Trouble with Tribbles, I think. But I was captivated by the different characters, that there were so many different nationalities in one show. That was a resounding thing for me. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I don't see this on TV. And so that was basically my first memory. I was just a little girl. We had a pink vinyl couch across from that TV. I sat on it and I watched.
Steven, how about you?
Well, I'm a bit older. I was born in 1956, so I was 10 years old when Star Trek first came out, and I remember it. I actually was knowledgeable about it before it came on, because I remember that they had a full color TV guide at that time, and this was right about the time that television was changing to color. It was that year, 1966, was kind of the first time that shows were presented in color. And one of the reasons why there's that they have such colorful uniforms is because of that. They wanted to take advantage of color television, and so they did that super saturated color, which is what we were looking for in the film Unbelievable, to get that super saturated Technicolor look. But it was ahead of its time. It was different than anything that was on television at that time, and I was riveted to it. I watched every episode as it first was aired on. It was Thursday night at 8:30 on NBC, and I was there every Thursday night. Then, in later years, I think it went to Friday nights. Then it went off, and I was upset about it leaving NBC. I was living in Westport, Connecticut. WPIX in New York was the first independent channel to take the series into syndication.
That's the channel, actually, I first learned about Star Trek through as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, this was, I think, late 69. I think that they started playing Star Trek in syndication. And, of course, there were only 79 episodes. And so they ran through the 79, and then they stopped it. And then they put something else on. And I said, no. I mean, that's no good. So I remember getting on the train in Westport and going into New York and going to PIX. And I was with another couple of my friends. We were, I think, in first year of high school. So we went in there and we said, what's the deal? I mean, why aren't you running these shows? And they said, well, we ran them. I mean, that's all there is. And I said, then run them again. And they said, what? And I said, run them again. And then when you've done it, run them again. and they looked at each other like they couldn't believe what, this 15-year-old kid is in there telling them to run the things again.
Demanding for your show.
And yeah, well, I mean, this was, so I don't know how much an effect that had on the whole Star Trek, the awareness of the franchise and how it got out there. But I just wanted my Star Trek. I just wanted to keep showing. And you have to understand that this was at a time before DVDs and before tape or anything. You couldn't really see these things unless a TV station was playing them. So about a month or so later, they started playing it again, and then from that point on, it was on WPIX for years, and it was on stations all over the world after that. But it really didn't take off. Star Trek didn't really take off until like 1970. So that's kind of where I'm from right there at the very beginning of it.
I think this is probably the most important question of the whole interview, but how did you two meet?
Oh, well, I'll tell it real quick.
Okay.
I'll tell it. Both of us used to work in corporate America. Both of us worked in the defense industry. And I also worked in finance and investigations. And I left the finance industry, and I was figuring out what I wanted to do for a while, but I was always, in and out of acting. The very first set I was ever on, I worked with my aunt on Ozzy's Girls, which Ozzy and Harriet, it was the Ozzy and Harriet show, but it was the 70s version. And so, I didn't really ever really focus on acting. And just, I did Shakespeare, when I was in high school, and, I was pretty serious about it, but not to the point where I took it where I could have, and then when I decided I would, I haven't had a manager tell me, oh, I have a reading and audition. Would you mind being a reader? And I was like, fine, I'm not doing anything. I wasn't working every day at that time anymore. So I was like, fine, I'll do it for free. So I went into this audition, and I was the reader for all of the actors and actresses coming in for this film called Unbelievable. And I'm like, yeah, sure, this will be fun. I can go back and forth and banter with other actors as they're auditioning. And the gentleman who introduced me to Unbelievable sat me next to Steve, my husband Steve, who's sitting next to me now. And so we just went the whole day, and Steve was very respectful to all the young ladies that came in, and all the young men that came in to interview. And I just thought he was a really neat guy, and we started talking from there. And I think that just kind of became history. And I auditioned for my role, by the way, too. I was originally told there was no roles in the film, but there was investors in the room who were like, why aren't you auditioning? There's this role. And I'm like, well, I was told there was no roles. And they're like, no, you need to do this. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I was that kind of actress. I'll audition. And apparently the room liked my work. And so I was grateful, and I got the job that way. And then later on, my husband asked me, well, we were just boyfriend, girlfriend at the time. He asked me to be his producer, but I said no. And, but then I eventually said yes, because there were some situations going on that, wouldn't move this film forward the way it needed to be. So I finally said yes, and that was it. And then Steve, you can tell your part.
No, I think that does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we met.
Yeah.
So basically, the behind-the-scenes story of Unbelievable is actually a love story.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know that I go quite that far. But it's a story.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, what's your background in film and television production?
I'm a writer, and that's kind of how I started. As a kid, I used to write down little things on pieces of paper, and I'd keep them in a shoebox or that sort of thing. And then I realized that I was writing scripts, but I didn't even realize it because I was so young. I did learn screenwriting in college, and then I went to work in New York for ad agency, J. Walter Thompson in New York. I was a junior copywriter, and then I started writing industrial films for Fortune 500 companies. So I always wanted to go out to the West Coast, go to USC, go to film school, and I just didn't get there. And so, years and years and years later, after always having this thought, this dream about going out to the West Coast, I said, I'm just going to do it. So I went out and here I am, 64 now, and I've done my first feature film in Hollywood. So that's kind of how it all happened.
So I kind of gave the quick synopsis of what the film was at the beginning, but I'm pretty sure that you guys could do a much better job of explaining the film. So real quick, tell us what Unbelievable is all about.
Go ahead, Steve. You go on that.
Well,
what the plot's about.
It's essentially a movie in a movie. We have Robert Picardo start by doing a masterpiece theater bit, and he's talking about this film that was made like 50 years ago, and it was so bad. The film was so bad that the guy who ran the studio ended up trying to burn the film, and he ended up burning the studio down and killed everyone. But the film survived because it was in its it's in its metal container. We have a number of former Trek stars, guest stars that are producers. They're trying to produce something, and then they have this script and they say, hey, we'll do this, and whatever. And so then we go into the movie, and so the movie in the movie is essentially about an individual, Snoop Dogg, coming to Earth from Mars, and he's bringing this army of plants with him, and they're going to take over the world. And the puppet, our lead character, is Captain Kirk Stillwood, and Captain Stillwood pilots this ship called the Exit Prize, and they go off to the moon, a lunar base to the moon, to find the two missing comrades that are been up there, and they haven't heard from them in the past couple of weeks. And when they get up there, they find out that these people aren't, who they think that they are. They look the same, but they're acting very strange. And they come to understand that they are plants that are masquerading as humans. So they go chase the plants, and they destroy their mothership, and then they come back to Earth, and they find out that all the plants have taken over the world through spores. All the humans have inhaled spores and have turned into plants. And I guess it's a kind of an ode to coronavirus in a way, because
just worked out that way.
Yeah, it did work out that way. But they determine how to deal with the threat, and then we come out of the movie, the movie that was made, and then we're back into, we have an award scene, a motion picture award scene, and that scene was actually shot before they actually did that in real life at the Oscars. I thought, no one is ever going to misread the winner of the Oscars. So I said, this is certainly unbelievable. No one will do this. And then they did it. I couldn't believe it. But we had already shot that scene when that happened. And then the film ends with a blooper reel, and then on the back end of it, we have a little 1 minute Marvel type scene tucked behind the end credits, and that's kind of our ode to coronavirus, because I figured there can't be any 2020 film release without an ode to coronavirus.
Very true.
So that's kind of it.
It's kind of an ode that we wish we didn't have to make. It's kind of. It's intense with what it's done to people in the world. Got to laugh a little bit about it if you can, just to let bring some levity in our lives, because that's another thing. Our film is a parody. It's a time when people aren't smiling, they're not happy. There's deep social injustice going on. There's a major pandemic, and it just seemed right. We were already going to release in April, but then, that got canceled because of COVID. And then it was like, well, let's just release it now. And, maybe we can give people just a little bit of levity, just for a little bit,
And we had an event on August 1st for people to see the film for the very first time. And I told everyone, I said, this is something that you need to leave your brain at the door and just let it happen. It's back when I was a kid, I was a Thunderbirds fan, Fireball XL5, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, that type of stuff, and it's all ridiculous. If you think about, oh, this can't happen, or this would never occur, or whatever, then you lose the ability to be entertained. If you think about the Thunderbird 2 and how big it is, and it would never get off the ground, but this thing lumbers out and then just takes right on off, and you're just with it. Oh, okay, that's great. And these little puppets in there, and they're flying around, and okay. So you have to just kind of suspend your disbelief and just let it happen. And so a lot of that was what I was going for in Unbelievable. This is kind of an ode to a bygone era that I think a lot of people that are younger than, say, 50 don't probably even know about, unless they're aficionados of old TV series like that. It's a situation that you've got to just let it flow and be aware that that there's no rhyme or reason for it. It just is what it is, and there's a sweetness about it, because I didn't want to be mean, and I didn't want anyone to believe that we were making fun of Star Trek. This had nothing to do with that. What this was essentially, look, we love Star Trek, but I think that there's a legal situation that most people don't realize. You can't just have a Star Trek movie, independent Star Trek movie, that you're using Paramount's independent or their intellectual property. You can't have Vulcans and Romulans and Klingons and the Enterprise and that sort of thing, because they'll sue you. It's this is their property. Being a writer, I was very cognizant of that. And so we made sure that we didn't violate any of their IP, but we're also covered under parody law. Parody law allows people to essentially make fun of something, so long as they're not being malicious or preventing someone from being able to make money on what they do. We are very much Star Trek fans, but we can't be Star Trek fans and violate Paramount's intellectual property.
Well, if you I know you saw the film, Matthew. If you look at, say, our form of the Gorn, our Gorn is Don Cornelius Jr.
Yes.
Our Tribble-like characters are Cribbles, and Steve, and that wasn't even my idea. Steve made them Cribbles because of Snoop Dogg and, being at the crib kind of thing. We just had a lot of fun creating everything, because we, when you love Star Trek, you love Star Trek. It was kind of like if you were at home and you're with your friends and they just happen to be Star Trek fans, and you're just like, oh, well, what if I said this? And what if this happened in the Star Trek world? And what if this happened? It was kind of like that. We would be in the middle of the night. Like, I don't know if you know, well, the story of how Steve came up with the puppet. We really wanted to hire William Shatner, but William Shatner was really busy. And, he's probably more than what we could afford as well, right? But we really wanted him, but we couldn't manage to get him. So in the middle of the night, Steve comes up with, well, why don't we make the lead character a puppet? And this is like 2:30 in the morning, so I'm past sleep, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, okay, we'll do that, right? And then next thing you know, I forgot if it was the next day or the day after, we were at the Kyoto Brothers place, and they were making a puppet for us. They used one of the old Team America World Police puppet bodies.
So one of the big attractions for people to want to check out this film is the fact that you've got, I think it's about like 40 different folks who are either on Star Trek or involved in Star Trek in some capacity. We mentioned you've got Chase Masterson, Tim Russ, Garrett Wang. They're part of the crew that goes to Mars. You've got Robert Picardo, Armin Shimmerman. I could name them all, but we're going to be here all day. But I wanted to ask you guys, who was the first Trek alumni that you got booked to be part of this project?
The first one that agreed to do it was Michael Dorn, actually. We had presented this to Michael, and this was not at that time going to be a Star Trek film, but he was looking at it, and he actually wrote us back, and he said, "Is this for real?" And it was kind of like he thought that we were trying to be serious about it, and I said, "No, nothing in this script should be considered to be, in any way serious whatsoever." And he said, "Oh," and he says, "Oh, okay, I get it. I'll do it." And then he said, I know Marina Sirtis really well. Would you want me to talk to her?" And I said, "Absolutely, do that." And so then I said, well, okay, if we're gonna go this way, then we probably should just switch up and get as many of these Star Trek people as we can get. And so it became a kind of a mad world of Star Trek. And we went to conventions. Most all of these actors know each other. If they didn't work together, they met each other at the conventions. We went to the conventions. We told the actors who we were and what we were doing, and we had the script if they wanted to see the script. And a lot of them said, "Oh, well, if they're doing it, I'll do it." And then it got to the point where everyone was talking about it, and they all wanted to get in. And I kept writing other scenes and trying to fit people in. And I think I had at least another 8 or 10 stars that probably wanted to get in. I just couldn't keep writing other scenes for them. Everyone seemed to want to have a scene with the puppet, and I had to kind of limit it at a certain point because we needed some integrity to the storyline. But it kind of took off from that one.
Yeah, and you guys got the Queen herself. You got Nichelle Nichols in the film. What's it like working with Nichelle Nichols?
Well, Nichelle is very close to us. She became very close to us, and I will say that Nichelle is just a consummate professional. She really knew exactly what we were trying to do, and she was all on board with it. She was the one that I had run the puppet idea by. Originally I was, as I said, we were trying to get Shatner to do the lead, and then I told her, well, what about a Shatner-like puppet? And she started laughing, and she laughed for like 20 minutes. And she said, "Oh, that's much better than some like 80-year-old guy running around." Yes, absolutely, do the puppet. So it was really Nichelle that kind of cinched that for us, and then we knew, okay, maybe we got something here. So we went on. So she was integral to the production.
And we had a personal relationship with Nichelle. Nichelle actually insisted on giving me away in marriage to my husband, and threatened that if he messed up, that she knows where he lives. But she's loved both of us, and without her moral support, I mean, there's one thing to be in a film, to be an actress or be a co-producer even, but without her moral support, it definitely would have made the days, a bit harder. She had insight into the industry, the way people are, the things people say, obviously way more than what we did. So she was always there for us, and, we love her very much. That's someone who is like family to us.
And I would also add that she probably was very integral in us getting Snoop Dogg. When we got Snoop Dogg, we didn't realize that he was such a Star Trek fan. We went to his...
I wouldn't even realize that either.
Oh no, he's a very full-on Star Trek fan. We went over to his compound in Inglewood, and on the walls, walking in on the walls, he's got these huge murals of Kirk and Spock and Nichelle, all of them up on the wall. And then as we were going down another hallway, it was like, Starship and Mothership and this sort of thing.
Battleship.
We walked into his main office, and it's in the shape of the bridge of the Enterprise. And
Wow, that's insane.
With a captain's chair as well.
Yeah, and
with colors.
He sits there, and so I told him that he would have a scene with Nichelle, and he was like all into that.
Yeah,
and she was credited as a co-producer of the film.
And I'm just curious now, how much did that set smell like weed the entire production when he was around?
Oh.
No, it actually didn't. He kept his marijuana to himself in his suite. We filmed at an estate in Malibu that we had filmed at before, and he was really quite wonderful. He kept to himself in his area, and the LA Times was on set at the time, and they came in and did a quick photo shoot. There's actually a picture that's circulating. It's of Nichelle sitting on this rock, and there's a beautiful ocean behind her, and that's actually done on our set. But Snoop Dogg, Robert Davi, Nichelle was on the set, and he was just wonderful. It was just, his room is, to answer your question, his room is pretty much the only thing that smelled like weed. He came out, he did his role, he was beautiful and wonderful. He was happy that we liked him in his outfit. That was a big deal for him, and he just brought it. I mean, I was very, very impressed with him, as I've probably been most of my life,
And he told us that that this was going to be this generation's Up in Smoke. He said, it will be. It's probably better for people to watch this thing when they're high. And so that kind of goes back to the leave your brain at the door thing. It's just, it's a kind of a wild ride.
Yeah, it's definitely a compliment when Snoop Dogg says something like that. Now, Angelique, you got to actually be on screen with several of these folks, including Nichelle. You did a lot of scenes with Manu Intrayami. You were in a scene with Michael Madsen. This must have been a dream come true for you to be able to work with so many high-profile actors.
You know what? I know it's going to sound weird, but it wasn't a dream come true. I think every person and every individual is different. I mean, I come from corporate America, and I grew up with a lot of celebrity. My aunt was a blaxploitation star, and I was just around that all the time. Acting for me was more of something that I enjoyed. I grew up with a kind of a rich family, and then poor, and then, abusive people. And so the stage was my place to explore, a different character or a different life. And so when I performed with all of these people, literally it was just being on stage and being a different person. I was honored to be with the people, but I've never really said, oh, I want to be in the scene with this person or that person. It was just like, this is an honor. I really love these people. They're really good people, or, they're fun to work with. You just bring it like any other actor would bring. I mean, that's just my way of thinking. And I know I'm a little weird, but it's just not, it's different for me.
So now, directing all these different folks from Star Trek shows, again, you got to keep in mind that we're talking Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Enterprise. And, a lot of these folks already have a rapport with each other because they've been on the same show. But, for example, you've got Chase Masterson from DS9 now working with Garrett Wang and Tim Russ from Voyager. So what's it like to corral all these actors together and to have them get an on-screen chemistry together?
Well, I think they already had on-screen chemistry just because they all knew each other. One really wonderful thing, the most special thing about our film was I loved seeing it when, okay, so no one's on set yet and we're all preparing for pre-production, or not pre-production, but production for that day. And everyone's coming together. The actors are coming, and the actors, they see each other and they're like, "Oh my God, I missed you. I haven't seen you in so long." And it was a reunion every single day that we shot. Every single day that we shot was a reunion. It was like seeing them so happy to see each other, and that made me happy because it made it more of a personal, experience versus, oh, we're just this film that they're working on. So, it was interesting. It was interesting and fun.
And the actually, when you mentioned that about they were from Voyager, I actually had tried to get Jerry Ryan to play that lead character at one time, but we weren't able to get her under contract. Chase had already shot the pilot scene. She plays another role called Natasha the pilot, and she had already shot that. That was actually our first shot of the entire movie. So she came in and just really aced it, because I have to say, we were preparing to do that with a different actor, and for her to kind of come in and learn all the lines and get ready for that role, that was pretty remarkable.
And Chase is amazing. You just kind of fall in love with Chase. I remember when she first came on set and performed the Natasha role, it was like she just stole everyone's hearts because she was so good. And when you're new filmmakers and you're working on bringing actors in, you don't know who's going to say yes and who's going to say no. But this role was made for Chase. It was perfect for Chase, and she killed it. I can't even imagine another Star Trek star who could have even come close to what she did. Like, I just can't even see it. She was so good. And everyone
there was great casting.
Yeah, she was amazing, and everyone on set loved her. She's really a very special human being. She's not just an actress. She's a friend, but she's also just a very special human being. She's the head of the pop cultural anti-bullying coalition, and she really cares about people. And that made her more captivating. It makes her more captivating, period, because she actually cares about people.
And you guys had Chase playing several roles, but I think the person who had the most roles was Robert Picardo, because he's in the beginning. He's Boris. He's a doctor at the end. I can't remember now his name, but that's a spoiler. He plays so many roles. What was it like working with Robert Picardo, just being so versatile in all these different things he's doing for the film?
He's awesome. You can go, Steve. I just love Bob Picardo. He's just excellent in everything.
Yeah, the one thing, well, first of all, the two scenes that we shot the very first day of principal photography was the Natasha and Boris scene, and the very first scene, which is the Masterpiece Theater scene. And so we had Bob for the day. So that's the reason why he played Boris and he played Edgar Allan Putz. So we had him do that. We actually had some outtakes that we showed during our event on the first, and one of those was him knocking the film into the fire, and we had no idea that it was actually going to go into the fire. We thought we would have to cut away and kind of fake it that way, but it actually went straight into the fire, and it was that was a great shot. But anyway, the other scenes were the two scenes that we shot toward the end of the movie, which was the Academy Award scene and the hospital scene. And at that time, we were trying to get it was the scene in the hospital was for Dr. None Too Soon, and that was for Brent Spiner. And we had actually gone to Brent's representation, and his manager and agent said yes, he'll be there. And for whatever reason, he didn't show up that day. And so here we are, we're shooting, and we had to have somebody do that role. And so Bob was there because we kind of wanted all the actors to kind of come back for that day for the Academy Award scene. And so he said, well, I'll do it. And so that's how he ended up doing Dr. None Too Soon. It made more sense for Brent to do it, but then when we started thinking about it, it did make more sense for Bob to do it, because he bookends that moment where he says unbelievable from the first scene. So it worked out. So yeah, that's the reason why Bob was in four different roles.
And I think my favorite scene in the film is the one you got with Jeffrey Combs and Armin Shimmerman together, because those two on screen are just magic together. That must have been a hilarious shoot day for you guys.
Yeah, that was we were out in Malibu that night, and we had the girls went first, Olivia Dabo and Julie Warner and Dina Meyer, and they had done their bit, and then they said, "Can we stay and watch the guys, do this?" Because the scene, just to tell your audience, the scene has 3 female hazmat people that are affected by plant spores, and they start turning into men. So then Jeffrey Combs and Armin Shimmerman and John Billingsley have turned into men. And so then they take the same roles. And so the girls were kind of sitting off to the side, just trying to hold their laughter in. I mean, it was really funny. We had a blast with that scene. And I think the other story about that is that we were shooting at a house that was next door to Michael Madsen. Michael Madsen lived next door to this scene. He was out on his deck looking at this production, and then he contacted the owner of the property that we had shot at, and the owner called us and said, Michael Madsen wants to talk to you. And so we said, okay. And so Angelique spoke with him, and he's a Star Trek fan, and he wanted to come into the film. And so I ended up having to write that whole scene with Michael Madsen being the president, and with Gary Graham and with Von Armstrong.
And it worked out because we mentioned the president, but we didn't have a president yet. So
yeah.
A lot of auspicious things like that happened.
Yeah, we shot that as an extra because of the fact that Michael wanted to come in, and so we shot it, and that worked out pretty well. So it was it was a lot of serendipity in this. We would just we would kind of move from one scene to the next, and we were doing a lot of ad-libbing. We were going off script a lot, and we would just say, oh, let's do this, and a lot of times the ad-libs were better than what I had written in the script, and so so be it. I mean, that's fine, but it's there was a lot of serendipity in this, as we put it together. I've always told people this, that the principal photography was really a joy. It was the post-production that was a slog. It really mired down in the post because we had so many elements. I don't think people realize when they see it just how many elements that we have in there. It was more than what we had expected, but it was it became a real slog on the post. But that was a fun scene. We enjoyed pretty much all of our principal photography.
So for folks today who are listening and want to check out Unbelievable, where can they watch the film, and where can they find out more about what you guys are up to?
Well, right now, currently it's on Amazon transactional VOD. It's also on Google Play and on Vimeo Plus, I believe. And it's going to be going to iTunes and Fandango now, and Xbox OTT, and then it'll go to cable systems. It'll go to SVOD, like Netflix, Hulu, that type of thing, and AVOD, and then we'll eventually get the DVDs out, and so it's a process, but yeah, it's right now they can go to Amazon, and it's available out there right now.
So again, guys, the film is unbelievable. We're going to have links to where you can watch this in the show notes, so do make sure you guys check it out today. Angelique, Steven, thanks so much for your time, and I wish you guys much success on Unbelievable and everything else you're working on in the future.
Thank you so much, Matthew. You're wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank
take
you.
care, Matthew. Have a good weekend.
And everybody listening, first stick around. We've got Gerald Fried coming up next, who was the composer for Unbelievable, and he's going to talk to us about Unbelievable and Star Trek and all sorts of other shows that he's worked on. So stay tuned.
Trek Untold will return momentarily. Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. If you're a Star Trek cosplayer looking for props, or toy collector looking to spice up your shelves, Triple Fiction Productions has you covered. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. You can expect the same amount of care and attention to detail in any of the items in their catalog, whether it's a prop replica for use in a fan film, or part of a cosplay, or accessories and playsets for figures from Playmates, Migos, or Diamond Select. Own your very own tricorder or phaser rifle with working lights, the bridge of the Enterprise E for your Playmates figures, or any other item from countless species and ships from the Star Trek universe. All products are 3D printed in the USA and are constantly evolving and improving based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit them at triple-fictionproductions.net or on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
What's going on, everybody? It's your girl's favorite artist, Josie's boy.
And I'm Alexis A. McCoy.
And we are the hosts of Call Me When It's Over.
We are more than just a podcast. We are a culture cast.
Yes, and you can check us out every single Saturday with a brand new episode. We're available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Play.
And you can catch us on our homepage at RigsWorksNetwork.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at _Call Me When It's Over.
That's right. And as always, speak up, speak out.
And leave your ego at the door.
We now return to Trek Untold.
And we are back on Trek Untold, and joining us now we have a legend in music. This is the first time, folks, we've ever had anybody who's been a composer or been involved in the music of Star Trek. But in addition to Star Trek, he has composed music for nearly 200 films and television shows, including Mission Impossible, Roots, Gilligan's Island, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Dynasty. He's an Emmy Award winner and an Oscar nominee whose music you've heard all your life, and most recently, he's now done the sci-fi parody film Unbelievable. Today, we have the honor of speaking to composer Gerald Fried. Jerry, how are you today?
Not bad. Virus to the contrary notwithstanding.
So you grew up in New York City, correct?
If you call living in New York City for my first 20 years growing up, yes.
And what part of New York was that?
The Bronx.
The Bronx. Okay, I'm from Queens.
Oh, all right. I've spoken to people from Queens before. It's not as bad as speaking to Brooklyn people, of course. but in fact, I lived in Queens for about 5 or 6 years in Fresh Meadows.
So in the Bronx, where did you grow up? Were you always into music?
Yeah, well, my grandfather was a professional musician in the old country in Russia, and they left in the beginning of the 20th century, my mother was born in 1900, so they left around 1910. He had 5 daughters. 4 of the 5 daughters were professional musicians, not my mother. And I sort of came to, my Aunt Sally was my first piano teacher, and I'm grateful to her. I got the good inheritance. So I sort of grew up sort of with music.
And who were some of the musicians that you admired when you were growing up?
Well, I was a tenor sax player, so Coleman Hawkins was at the top of my list. Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young, people from that generation, Ben Webster. Then I switched to oboe, and the Robert Bloom and Harold Gomberg were my oboe heroes. And then went into composing and fell in love and have not recovered from the music of Igor Stravinsky, Bela Bartok. The good thing about having this diverse background is because in the movie TV business, sooner or later you're going to have to write music that relates to all those various cultures. So I sort of had a head start being a musician playing all those things.
Yeah. So you mentioned the oboe, and that's actually what you went to Juilliard for, if I'm correct, right? You were an oboe major?
Yes, I was oboe major at Juilliard, yes.
And so how did you enjoy your time at Juilliard? What did you learn while you were there?
I think the most valuable thing about Juilliard was that I was surrounded by all these bright, young, talented students, and we formed, some of the teachers there were from the old school, and frankly not very valuable, even though some of them certainly were. Well, you learn the fundamentals. You study what made the great composing masters great. I'm talking about Beethoven, etc., and why, and that was very valuable. When you're on a movie score and you're stuck, what do I do now? Then you think to yourself, well, if Beethoven was doing this, what would he do? What would he think about? So the culture of Juilliard was the most valuable thing about it, and the collection of all these bright, talented people up there. Am I making any sense?
Yes, absolutely. I went to Pratt Institute for illustration, and I kind of had the same experience where I had a few good teachers, but for the most part it was about getting the fundamentals and more so just being surrounded by all these working artists that kind of help get you move along and help you find things out about your work and yourself.
Oh, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay.
So one of your earliest things that you worked on that I think you're known for is some of Stanley Kubrick's earlier films, and I'd like to hear the story of how you got connected to Stanley.
Okay, sure. I was kind of an illiterate musician compared to all those people down in Greenwich Village who at the age of 16 sounds like they knew everything about everything. And Alex Singer was a neighbor of mine up in the Bronx, and we were handball partners. And he had this friend, Stanley Kubrick, who was a Look magazine photographer at the age of 16, actually. And he put together his money and he made a film. And Alex said, a friend of mine is an oboe major at Juilliard. Do you need some music for your movie? And I said, sure, Kubrick said. So I met with Stanley, and we got along kind of okay. We actually became tennis partners briefly. And I also got him a game with my Barracuda ball club, the Barracudas. He wanted badly to be a regular kid, Stanley, and he was so bright that he couldn't possibly be a regular kid. Nevertheless, he wanted to go through the motions, including playing on a softball team. So I got him a game with the Barracudas, and he was grateful to me for the rest of our knowing each other, for making the appearance of a regular kid. Anyway, he asked me if I knew anything about composing a film score. I'm at Juilliard. So I said, lying shamefully, said, of course. All oboe players know about conducting, composing movie scores. And he actually said, okay, well, I'll take your word for it. We're going to score at the RCA Fifth Avenue Studios up in New York, and will you be ready in a couple of months? I said, sure. So I spent the next 2 or 3 weeks going to 2 or 3 movies a day to find out what the hell to do. And we did that first score day of the fight, and Stanley liked it, and the RKO liked it. It was for RKO Pathé, and both Stanley and I were hired by RKO Pathé to do other work for them based on that one score. So I do owe Kubrick my career as a film composer. He trusted me. He shouldn't have, but he trusted me, and I got lucky, and the score worked out okay.
Yeah, I think he made the right choice.
Okay.
So I've heard about Stanley's reputation being a perfectionist on set, but what was he like to deal with when you're the music composer? How was he to work with?
At the beginning, he wasn't Stanley Kubrick of notoriety yet. He was just a guy who was trying to make a movie who didn't know that much about film scoring himself, even though he played drums in his high school orchestra. So he left me alone. Then when we got down to my 5th movie for him, Paths of Glory, he was the Stanley Kubrick of the exacting taskmaster that he's famous for. And that was more difficult. It was also more challenging. You had to justify every single note, which was kind of fun and exciting. But that was not the case at the beginning. He just left me alone.
Yeah, so with Kubrick, you worked on several things, including Fear and Desire, Paths of Glory, as you mentioned, and The Killing. Which of the works that you did with Stanley are you most proud of?
Probably Paths of Glory. It was the first all-percussion score, as far as I know, in music film history. Well, like I said, we used La Marseillaise and we used French ballroom scene, some music. But it was an all-percussion score, and I think I'm proud of that. And he let me do it. It was daring of him. He was trying to get a commercial release, so to have a score that was all percussion was practically unheard of, and he let me do it. I also liked the music I did for The Killing, kind of a relentless, go-get-'em kind of approach. And even Fear and Desire, that first feature, Kubrick did movies that made, invited you to write creative individual stuff, so I guess I liked all of them with him.
And it must have been very exciting seeing Kirk Douglas on the screen for a movie that you did the score for.
Oh, hell yeah. As a matter of fact, what was the name of the picture that Stanley and Kirk Douglas after that? Oh, I'm blocking out the name.
Oh, Spartacus.
Yeah, right, yeah. So Stanley wanted to bring me along on Spartacus, and it was Kirk who said, Jerry, I like you. You did a good job on Paths of Glory, but I don't think you had the experience. I was still like 20, 21 years old. I don't think he had the experience to do this. So he blocked me doing Spartacus.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. But still, as I said before, I owed my film career to Stanley. He broke the catch-22 in films, which is you can't get hired unless you prove yourself. You can't prove yourself unless you get hired.
Very true.
Yeah, so Stanley broke that barrier for me. And we retained a friendship over the years, even when he was in England.
So on the other side of the coin, you also worked with Roger Corman, who's another very prolific director, but not known as much for high art films like Stanley. How would you describe working with Roger Corman?
It was pleasant in that he kept his nose out of our affairs. He said, he implied that, with my reputation, I know what to do, so he's going to shut up and wait till it's finished and enjoy it, which is what he did. He showed up for the recording, but he didn't have much to say.
And how did a recording session work back during 50s and 60s and 70s? Was it like that they projected the film and you would compose live in front of it?
Yeah, exactly. And we had cue marks on the film itself, streamers, 3-second streamers, so we knew when to come in to begin the cue, and punch marks on the screen sometimes to help us set the tempos. So yeah, it was pretty much then as it is now. Well, now it's sort of more electronic, and we work at home with all the fancy electronic equipment.
So we've heard a lot of actors who we've chatted with on this show who talk about the hustle of being an actor and going from gig to gig. But what's the hustle like for a music composer back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s?
What was it like? It was dangerous to count on doing that for a living. So I kept my job. I was doing saxophone work around New York, and I was also with the Pittsburgh Symphony and the Dallas Symphony and the New York Little Orchestra on oboe. Then when I moved to California, I got a job with the LA Philharmonic. So I kept that sort of my basic income, but the work kept on coming in. Enough people saw what I did and called me to do their movies. So I do not really have a hard luck story.
You also did some work on Gilligan's Island, I read, and at one point you actually had some musicians doing a part where they were blowing into bottles. What can you tell us about your time on Gilligan's Island?
It was a lot of fun, and Sherwood Schwartz had a good sense of humor, and he also left me alone. For the first couple of sessions, he came to the sessions, to make sure I knew what I was doing, and he liked what he heard, and he left me alone. And that was kind of dessert, Gilligan's Island. Paths of Glory and those heavy movies were the entree, and the Gilligan's Island was the dessert. It was fun and silly, and the guys loved playing it. And it was a nice part of my credentials.
I've heard that there was an episode that you did where you had musicians just blowing into bottles. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. What they did, Ginger, one of the Gilligan's Island characters, missed music. So Gilligan and the captain went around and collected seashells and figured out the pitches for them and blew across the top of the seashells to produce a pitch. So it was up to me to tell them what seashells to blow into at what time to make tunes.
Oh, that's really fun.
Yeah. It's kind of fun.
So, one other show I want to talk about before we jump into Trek, and that's The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And the spy shows were a very big deal in that era. So I'm curious, what did you do to try and make your music stand out from the other shows on television at that time that were doing spy TV shows?
Like Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
How could I put in words what I did? For one thing, I concentrated on keeping the audience interested and excited in what was going on, to such an extent that one of the reviews I got of Stanley Kubrick's The Killing was that Gerald Fried's music pounded me into the wall like a hammer.
Oh, wow. That's a compliment.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to, and that's what Kubrick wanted. He said, we were talking about what the music should do in this or that scene. He said, he sang to me a drum pattern, and I understood what he meant. And that sort of helped me. It confirmed what I thought music should do. Should keep the audience and their ears glued to the seats. And maybe that's what I did. That's what differentiates my music from other film composers. Kind of a relentless, dramatic, not pounding, but urgency. I like the word urgency better.
So let's talk a little bit about Star Trek now. How did you get the job to work on Star Trek?
Doug, what's his name? Who called me? Not Bob Justman called me. They knew my work, and they called and said, would like to do a Star Trek. I said, well, sure. So I did one, Shore Leave, and I was lucky in that it was, remember the story of Shore Leave?
Yes, yeah, everybody goes down to this planet where they think they're going to be taking a vacation, and the planet keeps popping up various things from their head onto the surface and confuses everybody. It's a pretty fun episode.
Oh, you got that exactly right, yeah. So I had a chance to show off my various chops because everybody had a different fantasy that was asking to be fulfilled. So I wrote practically 5 different pieces of music for each of those episodes. In addition to that, just to keep the drama going in between. So it was a great showcase for me. And I did, I don't know how many, another dozen or so Star Treks.
Yeah, I know you did Shore Leave, you did Cat's Paw, Friday's Child, Amok Time, and The Paradise Syndrome. And I know a lot of that music was also reused in several other episodes again and again, so your stuff is heard throughout the series.
Yeah. Yeah, and they were talented people with taste, and they made interesting shows, and it was interesting to work on them with them.
So every piece that you composed for Star Trek, they all have very different and unique sounds to them. How did you decide on what choices to make when you composed the music?
Well, Cat's Paw, the clarinet is the cat instrument. Prokofiev thought so in Peter and the Wolf, and the clarinet tiptoeing around is like a cat tipping around on Cat's Paw. So I wrote it for 5 solo clarinets, including a bass clarinet and a contrabass clarinet. So that was easy. My choice of music for that was mostly cat music. And things like that. I take my cues from the picture itself and try to match the picture and try to use music to get inside the characters like music can do that other the vehicle visual cannot quite do. Get inside the soul, the inner feelings of the audience. So with that in mind, I constructed my various Star Trek scores.
That's a great answer, and I've got a question on top of that I think it's very philosophical, so bear with me here, but what determines how you interpret a physical thing in life and how we translate it with our ears into something musical? How do you find that soul?
I would say I would trust my intuition of those things. I looked at the work print and get a feel of the movie. What is the movie telling me? What does the movie feel like telling me? And I played in orchestras and jazz bands all my life. I said, well, okay, what instruments, what kind of sounds will get that feeling from this movie? And you work from there, from the feeling. And then I remember, how did I feel with this part of a Beethoven symphony or in this part of a Duke Ellington arrangement? How did I feel? What did that make me think and feel? And said, okay, I could use that for this part of the movie. And kind of you construct it in your unconscious. By the time you sit down at the desk and pick up the pencil, the feeling of it is pretty much formed. Oh yeah, here's what they're thinking of. This is what they're worried about. This I want to make more romantic. And so those things happen in not my unconscious, let's say my subconscious. I think this is what all composers do. And then you translate that into actual musical action. What instruments, what does they play, what rhythm, what pitches, and it's called composing, or composing for film anyway.
I've spoken with other people who've worked on Star Trek shows throughout the various series, and when it comes time to production and post-production, it's very fast-paced. So when you're composing for Star Trek, how much time do you have to actually do an episode?
I think on shows like that there's one every week. There's never enough time. You just have to discipline yourself and say, well, for the next 5 days and nights, I'm gonna sleep 3 hours a night and just get the job done. It's a challenge, and it also has to be your best work. That sounds like a contradiction in terms. That kind of schedule and best work. But you had to. That's the nature of the business, especially of the TV business. So I think if I got a week to do a Star Trek, that was a big deal. Usually more like 4 or 5 days.
And the group that you worked with, was that changed every single week, or did you have one dedicated group of musicians on Star Trek?
I had a basic core of musicians that I called on, but because of the nature of the music, like sometimes you would write for 3 trombones, sometimes all strings, sometimes 2 rock and roll guitars. So there were basic half dozen musicians that I would basically call on, and otherwise it changes depending on the musical requirements. Like Shelly Mann was a percussion player that was on just about all of it. He was so versatile, of course a great jazz artist, but also he could had studio discipline, so he was one of my standard people. And Ralph Grierson on piano, Lincoln Mayorga on keyboard. They were so versatile, they were practically constant. So there was a nucleus that I used, but a lot depended. Like sometimes I would use no strings at all, or sometimes no brass at all. So it changed, but basically a half dozen musicians were on my standard people. And we got to be good friends over the years.
And on that note, I read that you had 6 clarinets for Cat's Paw.
Yeah. Did I say 5?
Or whatever it was. I know it was a lot.
Yeah, I did that. By the way, speaking of composers and musicians playing for me, ask me who was the pianist on the first score that I did for Kubrick.
Who was the first pianist you did for the score on a Kubrick film?
Andre Previn.
Ah, wow.
And also Johnny Williams was one of the standard guys. He did a lot of Gilligan's Island. He was one of the standard core musicians. He was so versatile that no matter what you threw at him, he'd throw it right back at you. Yeah, but I like John Williams, Andre Previn were my piano players.
Wow, that's kind of funny to think that John Williams worked on Gilligan's Island. How about that?
Yeah. and also on something called Shotgun Slade. Oh, that's a score I was sort of proud of. Do you know anything about Shotgun Slade?
Was that a TV series?
Yeah,
I'm a little too young for that, but can you tell us about it?
back in the 50s. Well, I get a call from my agent that Lou Wasserman, who was head of, I think, William Morris or MCA at the time, had this great idea to have a jazz western. So I laughed. They were obviously kidding me. Well, they weren't kidding. Shotgun Slade was a jazz western, and they sold. I did the music for the pilot, and it sold. And I did Shotgun Slade for something like 3 years, along with Gilligan's Island. That was one of my standard things. And John Williams was the excellent. He was actually. I used harpsichord because the harpsichord imitated the sound of a honky-tonk piano better than a real piano. So John Williams was my harpsichord player for 3 years of that show, Shotgun Slade.
Wow.
And Gilligan's Island.
And I'd say John Williams has done pretty well for himself since then, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Did you know about Revue Studios? How Lou Wasserman, he was head of, I think MCA at the time. No, head of Revue. Anyway, they were doing movies, but television was coming in the early 50s, and they figured they better get into television. So they formed a company to do nothing but TV shows called Revue Music. So they listened to the works of everybody in town. They hired 2 kids to be their permanent composers. We were on salary. I was one, Johnny Williams was the other.
Oh, wow.
So we started off our serious careers exactly on the same day when we were hired by Revue Studios to be their house composers.
So I'm kind of curious because I've talked to a lot of actors on the show, but never, again, anybody who's in music. And, how competitive is it among composers in Hollywood? Because you mentioned John Williams. We talked about Lalo Schifrin. There's guys like Henry Mancini, just so many other composers at that time. I mean, are you guys all friendly with each other? Is it all competition? What's it like trying to find work in Hollywood in those days?
It's a combination. The 4 guys you mentioned were doing so well that the competition wasn't an issue. But I can tell you, if I wasn't doing well and I had to hang out, well, actually, I played oboe for a lot of those guys. I did some of the Hank score. I did one of Lalo scores, one of the Johnny Williams scores as an oboist. Yeah, and I was struggling. I was already making it, but if I was struggling as a film composer, of course there's envy and jealousy. And my gosh, these are the guys I'm trying to break in to do what they're doing. I never had that because, as I was telling you, because of Kubrick, I got in at the beginning of my career. Actually, before I got to Hollywood, I flew out to do the first Kubrick movie there. So it was easy. But of course there's competition and I guess jealousy. But yet when we meet each other, we seem to get along fine. Like there would be composers forums for this or that. We would see each other. We're quite friendly. Of course, those guys you mentioned, we were all working. But what if I was, me, 10 years ago, out on the outside trying to get in? I probably would envy me, who's at the end. So I have an idea. I'm not answering your question. But yes, to say, of course, there's rivalry and jealousy, but there also was a good feeling. Like all those people you mentioned, we were friends. And guys like Fred Carlin was another one, all friendly.
So Amok Time is easily the most famous piece you worked on in Star Trek, and to this day, it's the first song people think of when a fight happens. It's got so much aggressive energy to it, and again, urgency, that word that you used. It's got a lot of urgency and tension in the piece. How did you compose the music for this episode?
Well, let's see, probably the same process I just described. I know that muted brass has a certain effect on audiences, so I had that thing, and you use repetition to get power for the music, and yet it had to be somewhat sympathetic. As I remember Amok Time, that's when you went back to mate on planet Venus, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Vulcan planet, yep. Yeah, it's got a lot of rising tension through the piece, which I think is what makes it so memorable as well. It starts one way and it just keeps building on itself until the crescendo.
Yeah. Did you know that that music was used a lot in Caddyshack?
It's been used everywhere. I mean, it's crazy. I'll be watching something on TV. Even yesterday, I was watching something, and there it is.
Really?
Yeah, did you ever think it would become part of the modern zeitgeist in the way it has?
No, you don't think about that when you write. You just try to do the best for the show, and you're very pleased that it happens that way. Yeah.
Now, in that same episode, also, you have some sections as part of that song that are supposed to be Spock on camera, and it's got this bass guitar sound, I think. So why did you choose a bass guitar to be the sound of Spock?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I like explaining this. Spock was a guy who had no emotion because he was not an earthling, but yet he wanted so badly to feel things. But he had to fight his way through his outer space nervous system. Just like a bass guitar wants to play espressivo, but because it's a thrilling bass guitar, it just can't do it like a regular guitar does. So that's what reminds me of Spock, a bass guitar trying to be espressivo and unable to really achieve that.
Interesting.
So that's my bass guitar story. But I'm delighted that you know things like his theme was for bass guitar.
I try my best. So, in the Paradise Syndrome, also, that's a episode that has a lot of cultural references in the music. There's a lot of like Native American sounds in that. So I'm curious, especially in that era, we're talking in 1960s. How do you do research to understand what these different sounds are and make it be an authentic sound?
Well, actually, I did my research. I did 2 movies based on Native American things. I Will Fight No More Forever, based on the story of Chief Joseph, and The Mystic Warrior was actually a mini-series based on the Mato tribe of the Sioux Nation. And so I did a lot of literal research listening to the music, and I also hired a Native American composer to make sure I didn't do something stupid or insulting or just misquoted improperly. So that's how I handle that. And Paradise Syndrome, I sort of used my research on the Native American movies that sort of governed my choice of music for that show.
And so how involved was Gene Roddenberry and maybe Gene Kuhn and Bob Justman? How involved were all the Star Trek people in overseeing what you did on the music?
Yeah, Gene Roddenberry was a name I couldn't think of before. He actually showed up for the first recording, and he liked what he heard. He liked the way I handled myself, apparently, because he left me alone ever since.
That's the best when you got the boss who's like, just do what you want and get to work.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And they were so busy on the next show that we were kind of relieved to say, okay, we don't have to worry about Jerry, that kind of stuff.
Now, did you ever get to interact with any of the stars on the show? Did you ever get to meet William Shatner or Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, Nichelle Nichols, any of those people?
Nimoy and I actually became friends.
Ah.
And we saw each other in New York a couple of times, and yeah. And William Shatner, I sort of got to be friendly with him. And Bob Justman, yeah.
So around the same time that you were doing Star Trek, you were also working on another Desilu show, and that was with Mission Impossible, which we know that Lalo Schifrin is the composer for that famous Mission Impossible theme, but you did a version as well for a certain episode of the show. But I just wanted to ask about Lalo Schifrin, because he's a guy I actually talked to like 10 years ago for another thing I was working on, and I just like hearing about Lalo. He's the guy that did Enter the Dragon and many, many other well-known films. Do you have any stories about Lalo Schifrin?
Except that he was extraordinarily talented. I mean, he was one of these people, when you think of Mozart, I think of Lalo Schifrin that way. I'm just very talented, but Lalo was enormously talented. And as well as, had a kind of mind that uses his talent for appropriate purposes for film music. But he's the kind of guy, with an ear like if you go to a piano and plop your elbow down on the keyboard, he could tell you what each of the notes your elbow hit. I can't do that quite well. I have good relative pitch, but he had this absolute pitch. Sometimes it's a handicap. Like I would play jazz dates with musicians who had absolute pitch, and if the piano was a quarter of a tone flat, they couldn't do it. They went crazy. So absolute pitch sounds good, but it sometimes gets in the way. But Lalo Schifrin was enormously gifted.
So I'd like to hear a little bit about you collaborating with Quincy Jones to work on Roots, which is what you guys won the Emmy for. It's a very evocative soundtrack, and I think it still holds up just as powerfully as it did back when it first aired. What was it like to work with Quincy?
The answer is we never worked together.
Ah.
The story, the root story is that Quincy was hired as the logical guy for the show. He was also at the height of his career. And so he started to write the first episode, and for reasons that they're kind of personal, I don't want to tell us about him. But for whatever the reason, he called up Stan Margulies, and said he can't continue. So I came in, finished episode number 1. The problem was the main theme. Quincy had to write a main theme because they were advertising the show and they needed the main theme, and Quincy didn't come up with it for reasons I'll let him tell you I want to go into. So that's when Stan called me, or David Wolper called me. So I came in, wrote the main theme, finished episode number 1, and did everything else in Roots, and Roots the Next Generation, Roots 10 years later, all the Roots. So we never worked together, even though when they put out the publicity, because our name both appears. He did some of the first episodes whose name had to appear in the credits. So that's why people think we worked together. We never did, not one note.
Ah, all right. Well, now we're setting the record straight, so that's good to know. So I like to ask about weird things on the show and go into like some obscure stuff. I don't know if you remember working on this, but do you remember doing the score for the Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island back in 1981?
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta tell me something about that, because that's just, I was looking through your resume and I find that and I'm like, what the heck is this?
I think I did. Okay, what was the theme they whistle in? The basketball players would whistle that tune, that pop tune. So I did a paraphrase of that. I think I had to pay the original writer for that. And it's just fun. I remember making a bit of, the movie ended with the Harlem Globetrotters picked up Gilligan and threw Gilligan through the basketball hoop. And I made quite a big thing of that, I remember. And it was fun. All the Gilligan's Islands were fun. That may be the most favorite one because it's the Harlem Globetrotters.
So is there one composition that you did that you wish you had done something different to and only realized it after the film or TV show was done?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of what that would be. Yeah, occasionally some minor regrets. But I can tell you what, Angelique and Steve Fawcette, they're putting out those 2 movies, Survive and Cruising to Terror was the other one. They're putting that out, and I heard the music to Cruising to Terror for the first time in 25 years, and I loved it. Usually I say, oh, geez, too much repetition, or I should have held back the trombones here and there. Usually you have those kind of things. But that score, I didn't. The Kubrick score, I don't think I have any regrets about that. And score like Cat Score, the Star Trek things, I think I like pretty much everything I did on those.
It's kind of funny just looking back on something, that many years later and just saying to yourself, that actually was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure if I thought about it, I'd say, oh, no, I overdid that, or that was too harsh, or that was too much like a hammer driving to a wall. But right now, I'm overall pretty happy with the stuff I did.
So most recently, you just worked with the Fawcettes, who we spoke to on this show, on their sci-fi parody film, Unbelievable. And I know you weren't working for a bit of time doing scores, so how did they manage to get you back to do a score?
There was a reason. I can't think of the reason. They knew some of my early work, or they're one of the few composers from the 50s and 60s who are still vertical. So maybe they like that idea.
So, when they pitched you the idea, what did you think about this film? It's very unique.
You mean the Captain Kirk being a puppet?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely unique.
I had mixed feelings. First, I felt a little religious about Star Trek. It was almost a holy experience. It was such a highly respected, popular show. And then I thought, I love their idea of plants taking over. I thought that was brilliant. And I kind of admired their idea of playing Captain Kirk as a puppet. That's daring. He's a popular guy, and I kind of admired them for it, even though aesthetically it kind of troubled me a little bit.
So how did you approach doing the music from Believable? Because it sounds like you tried to keep it very much in the vein of what you did on the 60s Star Trek show, but it's also a little bit more modern. So, what did you do for this film?
I pretty much took it seriously, like it was a serious show. I thought that would be funnier. And when the plants were taking over, I used a bass harmonica solo. Somehow plants, growing things, country, harmonica. That's the kind of association I was trying to describe to you at the beginning of this conversation. So that's the process. It just came to me, bass harmonica to play the villain plant music. That kind of worked, and I did that. And I kind of like it, the idea, and I still smile when I think of it.
Yeah, I watched the film yesterday, and I was hearing that bass harmonica, and I was like trying to figure out what that sound was, because it's also very alien sounding.
Yeah. Tommy Morgan was the harmonica player. We brought him in to Santa Fe to record it. And do you know the composer, pianist Dave Grusin?
I can't say I'm familiar, no.
Dave Grusin, he won an Emmy for Niagara Beanfield War, and I think The Graduate.
Ah.
Dave Grusin, he's a well-known composer. Anyway, he was living in Santa Fe for the time, so I figured, what the hell? I said, hey, do you want to play a dig on piano? So he was on the Unbelievable score, Dave Grusin and Tommy Morgan. And Stephen was so intrigued by these three old-timers that he took pictures of us, the three old guys on the Unbelievable recording, Dave Grusin, Tommy Morgan, and myself.
I really enjoy the music. It definitely sounds like Star Trek, and I can tell that you treated it seriously, and you treated it with a lot of respect and love. So, and it really shows. It's a really wonderful piece of music.
Well, thank you.
So, Gerald, you've had an amazing lifetime producing a legacy of brilliant work that's going to be remembered throughout the ages. What is the most important lesson that you've learned about life that has helped you through the years?
Oh, that's a big question. That down underneath, I had a lot of professional success in actually, 3 careers. But what I learned is that underneath, I'm still the same Gerald Fried that was a scared little kid trying to find a place in my life. And I still am that little kid looking for that. For all the fun I had and all the success in composing and all that. So that's what I take with me. That the hell with all that stuff. Me waking up every day, there's me and the day and the world around me, and my inner child struggling not to get lost in the shuffle. And I think that helped me through the dark times, and it's made the light times even more fun. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that's a very good lesson. I just basically remembering who you are and where you're from.
Yeah. You said it. It took me 5 minutes to say you said it in 30 seconds.
So, Gerald, last question for today. What's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
The fact that it's known all over the world over many generations. I sort of feel part of contemporary history, that I was part of something pretty big and pretty wonderful. That's the feeling you get from Star Trek.
Yeah, and you've definitely composed, again, a piece that is going to live beyond all of us. That Amok Time piece, it's going to be continued being listened to by the 25th century, guaranteed. By the time we have real starships floating around like Star Trek, they're going to still play that song.
Good. My great-great-great-great-great-grandkids will get some of the royalties.
So, Gerald, thank you so much today for your time and for chatting with us and talking about your career, your philosophy, and all of the work that you've given to Star Trek fans and so many other wonderful films and TV shows. You've got a lifetime of beautiful pieces, and it's been a real pleasure to speak with you today.
Well, thank you so much, and vice versa.
All right, thank you, Gerald. You have a good day, and be safe out there.
You too, Matthew. Bye.
Thank you to Steve and Angelique Fawcette for discussing Unbelievable with us today, as well as Mr. Fried for telling us some great stories about his career and philosophies on making music. For anyone who's curious about checking out Unbelievable, we'll have links in the show notes where you can watch the film, and it's worth your time to give it a look. In fact, there's about 60 Easter eggs for hardcore Star Trek fans in this movie to try and find, so if you're willing to accept the challenge, I'd love to hear from you, because I sure as heck couldn't catch them all. Head on over to facebook.com/officialunbelievablethemovie or on Twitter at @diffkindatrek and Instagram at unbelievablемv for more info. Star Trek parodies range from low-hanging fruit all the way up to works of art on their own. Galaxy Quest is definitely one of the better films that stands on its own 2 feet as not just a parody but a very good film. And we can't talk about The Orville without acknowledging that it's basically Seth MacFarlane's version of the Next Generation series. There's also that obnoxiously catchy Star Trekking song from 1987 by The Firm, and that one's pretty easy to find if you're looking to add a musical SETI eel into your ear. If you're questing to find all the Star Trek parodies out there, you're going to have your work cut out for you. As for me, I stick to the animated ones, and that includes a pretty robust library of shows like Kim Possible, The Muppet Babies, Tiny Toons, The Animaniacs, DuckTales, and Futurama, to just name a few. But oddly enough, one of the animated kids shows that's had the greatest dedication to parodying Star Trek was actually the Care Bears. The crew of the SS Friendship was run by Captain Braveheart Lion, with Lieutenant Cheer Bear at the helm, and Brightheart Raccoon and Grumpy Bear among its other crew members. You can watch their voyages for free on YouTube. And you know what? If you want something lighthearted and fun, it's worth doing. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Trek Untold. Please make sure you follow us on social media to see all of our memes and daily guest updates. And who knows what else, because you never know what pops up on our pages. All you have to do is look for Trek Untold on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you think about this week's episode. If you'd like to support this podcast, check out patreon.com/trekuntold to learn how you can keep our ship operating at full power. You can also check out some of our merchandise at teespring.com/stores/trekuntold. That's TEE spring.com. That includes shirts, stickers, mugs, phone cases, and a whole lot more. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this show and give us a review and rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. If you enjoy what we do here every week on this show, please give us a 5-star rating and review. It's the best way to make new listeners discover this podcast and help us grow. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions. If you'd like to send us some feedback, suggest a guest, would like to be booked on the show, or are interested in sponsoring us, email me at trekuntold@gmail.com. Once again, this has been Trek Untold. I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and until next time, fortune favors the bold.